Happy Wednesday, everybody. We're back reading Medicine Walk by Ardith Mayer. Yesterday we read chapter 4, where Burr Henderson finds water. He's able to get a drink, take a bath, and then he is wondering what's going to happen because there is a cougar lurking around. So he climbs a tree for safety and shelter, and actually that's where he sleeps. We are beginning Chapter 5, which is called The Second Day. Here we go. I woke suddenly, bewildered, feeling the painful crease across my butt where the limb had pressed into me all night. I lifted my head and found that my arms had gone numb. My hands felt like lumps of mud. As I worked to get my fingers moving again, I listened. Something had awakened me. Light was just showing in the sky behind the mesa to the east. A bird calling downstream was answered by another in a nearby cottonwood. A snarling scream rang between the heights on either hand, echoing back and forth, filling the dawn with fear. The cougar. I squirmed around to put the branch beneath a different part of my anatomy. My hands were working well enough now to dig out a few more raisins, which I tried to chew, couldn't. A tiny sip of water eased things a bit, and I managed to get them down, along with another piece of apricot. When I was done, my teeth felt as if they had fur overcoats. I broke off a twig and chewed it, the way Nachito had showed me, making it into a brush of scrubby wood fibers. With this, I polished my teeth. It tasted terrible, but it felt a lot better. By then it was light. The stream looked flat and pewter colored, and the trees and rocks were dark cutouts against it. But day was definitely at hand. I climbed down without bothering with the slanted trunk, dropping the last 7 feet or so. On the ground, I shifted my pack once more and eased off toward the water. If that had been a fish jumping the night before, I just might be able to catch it. Dad had taught me some pretty useful skills out on our jaunts together. I crept forward, moving as quietly as Nachito had tried to teach me to do. The eddy swirled slowly, catching the growing light in round ripples. I lay on my stomach and wormed forward until my face was just edged over the flat rock at the water's edge, then squinted down through the silvery ripples. There were rounded pebbles on the bottom, shadows among shadows, but one was darker, shaped like a fish. It was lying along the bottom, motionless. Asleep? I hope so. I slipped my hands into the water, feeling the icy ripples begin to numb them. On one hand on either side, deep enough, but not too deep, then bring them together, slowly, gently, as if they were bits of weed drifting in the current. That was the way. I grabbed the fish, and the fish convulsed, but it was too late. I had him. It was shaped like a trout, but there were differences I didn't recognize. I didn't care. It was food. Before it had stopped its reflexive flopping, I had gutted and scaled it with the pocket knife that had been one of my dad's birthday presents to me. I had no matches, and I wasn't about to try making a fire with a fire stick. So I ate it raw. It tasted wonderful. Well, not delicious, you understand. Just plain wonderful. I could feel my body soaking up the raw flesh like a sponge. I didn't waste any time after that. Before the sun was above the mountaintops, I was off again, while it was cool and I still had energy. The stream angled off southeastward, following the prevailing slant of the mountain ranges in this part of the country. Near enough to my direction, I thought. For me, a straight line was definitely not the shortest distance. Not with climbing up and down and getting into bottlenecks and having to backtrack. By following the water, I could cover more ground faster, as well as have a supply of drinking water right at hand. There would also be shade if needed. I still think it was a good idea, and it would have worked if things had gone a bit differently. But a couple of miles down the canyon, a wall of rubble choked off the way. Though the water seemed to be finding a course through the mess, it was too loose and shifty for me to dare try it. And it plugged the passage between two overhanging cliffs. There was no going around either. Those cliffs were not only sheer, but they were even undercut in places. No way to climb them that I could see. I had to go back a half a mile or so before I found a possible way up. A chimney had been carved down through the rock by some fault or maybe a stream of runoff water. It looked narrow enough to go up if I could remember the methods Dad had told me about using in his climbing days. I took a drink of water and refilled my bottle as full as it would go. Then I tackled the cranny. It was already hot, though the sun was only now lighting the far wall of the canyon. Inside the cranny, it was really hot. By now, my tennies were hardly more than scraps of fabric tied around my ankles. My feet were unmentionable. I left the bits of tops on just to keep from blistering any more than necessary. Working my way up that narrow cut, feet on one side, back against the other, was torture for everything I owned. I even discovered parts I hadn't known I had, and they hurt too. But I had lucked out in one way. The crack was not too wide for the length of my legs. It was possible. Not easy, but possible. If you wonder why I didn't just go back to the place where I spent the night and go up the easier slope, you just don't understand the state of my feet. To force them back up that pebbly stream bed, covering ground already spotted with more than a few drops of my own blood, was a thing I couldn't do. So I set my back and my feet and hunched upward. From time to time, I looked up. The cranny was irregular, leaning this way and that, but I could see a wink of blue at its top. It came out above. By the time I'd gone up 15 or 20 feet, I thought the skin was probably entirely off my back. I tried to forget about my feet, and there wasn't any relief in sight. I had to go up or go back. I kept plugging through a sort of frozen time when my body kept moving according to instructions and my mind just freewheeled. What had hit me all of a sudden was the kind of a fix that I was in. I had never dreamed of ever being entirely alone, without a human being to call on for help. Dad had always been at the end of a phone call. Nachito had always been at hand. Charlie had been with me most of the time except for nights. Now, there was nobody. Nobody at all even knew where I was, or even that I was still alive. It was the scariest thought I'd ever had in all my 12 years and 2 days. I turned off my mind and didn't think about anything but the creased stone across from my eyes, the feel of the rock against my back and elbows and hands. The pack was a pain too, though I had shifted it around so it could ride on my belly. About 50 feet up, I came to a place where there was enough purchase to let me look down. That was a mistake. I started shivering. That morning's raw fish tried to come up to my throat. I jerked my gaze back to the rock wall and moved. The remnants of my sneakers looked positively beautiful. After a long time, I came to a bit of outcrop. It was a pain to work my way around it, and once that was done, I decided to set my shoulders on it and rest for a little. I needed to eat a few raisins anyway. My energy was fading fast, and I had to get into open country with enough zip left in me to signal to any plane that might be searching for our downed aircraft. As the mere thought of it had called it up, there came a distant drone. A plane, no doubt of that, and there was no way on earth he could see me. Down here in this crack, I straightened upward, trying to see up the chimney, but it was no use. I felt sicker than before. Tears rose into my eyes, and a couple escaped before I could pull them back. I shook myself and got ready to start again. It seemed that this was going to be up to me all the way. I stepped up with feet, scooched up with my back, stepped up again, over and over. My mind kept wandering around, having to be pulled up short before it reached dangerous territory. I tried to keep it steered away from Dad, Mom, and Grandpa, and Dean, and from the rest of the cousins. Thinking about them would make me feel soft and squishy, and that wasn't anything I could afford right now. I thought of Nachito and Charlie. That was better. Nothing squishy about either of them. Charlie had told me about the medicine journey that he was due to take when he got to be 12. I'd felt envious of him, having a ritual so old and tough and unusual ahead of him. In 6 months, he'd be off on that walk. He had to go out into the wilderness all alone, without food or water, and finding the guiding spirit for his life, his symbol, his totem. I paused for a moment, my feet braced. I was 12. Was this my own medicine journey? It had all the earmarks, that was sure. I had been 12 the very day it started. I had next to no food and very little water. I had already done things I had never dreamed myself capable of doing. I might just die, I said aloud, and the words echoed eerily up the chimney. I hadn't let myself think about it that much. But now, it wasn't too scary. I'd been doing my very best, step by step. Maybe everything hadn't been right, but it had been the best that I knew how to do at the time. Was this the way a medicine walk was supposed to go? I don't know. I wasn't Apache or even Indian. Things probably wouldn't go for me the way they would go for Charlie. I looked up, gauging the distance, and began moving again. I was almost halfway up, the best I could judge, but it still looked a lot like a terribly way to the top. I was tired. I couldn't recall ever having been so tired. My knees were beginning to tremble along with my arms. I was panting, though I tried to control that. My t-shirt was not only ragged, but absolutely dirty with sweat and grit. I maneuvered around another knob of rock at my back. It was about time. I needed another resting perch. I settled back against it to get my breath. Without any warning, the rock shifted and fell away with a grinding clatter. Suddenly, my shoulders were lower than my feet, and my heavier upper half wanted to follow the rock all the way down the chimney. My heart gave a tremendous thump. This is it, I thought. Now is when I die. And that is the end of chapter 5. Tomorrow we'll find out what happens to Burr in that chimney. Have an awesome day and enjoy the sunshine. Bye-bye.